How are you all doing? No, I haven't been around for a wee while, for the simple reason that there's just been nothing happening that's been worthwhile making videos on. There is one coming up, I hope, in the not too distant future. What I've got is a shipment of firearms that I've been waiting almost 2 years to arrive from the UK. Originally they were Lend-Lease firearms and stored long-term war storage in the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, some various parties, I think some of them possibly connected with the Russian mafia, appreciated there was a value for this type of firearm in the West with collectors, and by fair means or foul they've been tricking this stuff out to dealers in the UK. The deal with the people in the UK, they are allowed to maintain the firearms in working order for a set period, and provided that they have a destination which the weapons are going to be on shipped to, they're allowed to hang on to them. If they are there in the UK for, I think it's longer than 12 months, and they have to be deactivated, they're subject to the normal firearms laws that pertain to the United Kingdom. Anyway, there's a bunch of those arriving, and I'd like to start the whole exercise again because, as you know, Jim and I's channel was attacked and it's been taken down. So Jim's going to do his own thing for a wee while. I'll do my own thing. We'll get together a bit later on. But there was a series of videos that I started on the weapons and equipment of the various belligerent nations, and I'd like to kick off with the Russians. So I'm just waiting. I've got a light machine gun coming. When that gets here, and a submachine gun, when that gets here I'll have the full collection of Russian infantry small arms of World War II. So I'm going to make a video on that, the equipment, and just have a bit of a general yak about the experience of World War II as experienced by the Frontoviki, or the Russian infantryman. I had a friend over on the weekend, a guy I haven't seen for a long time, a number of years. He hasn't been to the house since we rebuilt it, and he certainly hasn't been in the man cave here. And he asked me why I had such an interest in the Second World War. And it's a question you get quite a bit. And I think it's an interesting question. It's a strange thing. I mean, the Second World War's been over now for damn near 70 years, and yet it still resonates with a whole wide variety of people, wide variety of generations. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. John Updike, who's America's last remaining man of letters, and I'm quoting Rick Atkinson here, but he said that the Second World War is the West's, or the 20th century's central myth, by which he meant that it's equivalent to the old classical great epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the great tales. And I think the Second World War, in our consciousness, occupies the same sort of space. It is a scope and scale which the world had never seen before. It remains the biggest conflict in history. Although it's been over for 70 years, it still resonates with us. Well, the Soviet Union was around for a long time afterwards until it collapsed in the 1990s. We're still dealing with the legacy of World War II, and in fact the First World War in the Middle East at the moment. A lot of the nation states that exist only came into existence because Western statesmen, Churchill being one of them, sat down and drew lines in a very arbitrary fashion over the maps when they were sorting out the settlement of the Treaty of Versailles and establishing spheres of influence. So you got the First World War, which gave rise to the Second World War, giving rise to the Cold War, and it's just this continuum. It's a scope and scale too. It was a global conflict involving pretty much everybody apart from the South Americans and various African nations. But it's on such a broad canvas, I think, that it resonates with people's imaginations. And I think more importantly, it's the final conflict where the human component was so important, so central. The technology was advanced enough to be interesting, but even the most advanced systems, weapon systems that were in existence, whether it be an aircraft carrier or a B-29 bomber, still had the human component very central. If you have to look at the B-17 and the heavy bombers, bristling with machine guns, but they were tracked by eye and fired by hand. Any one of the tanks that you care to name, the guns were laid by eye, and there was a great deal of human component, human experience and human training that went into when you made a shot, whether that shot was going to hit things or not. So that the human component is so important, and thereafter, in the aftermath of the Second World War, that human component has been marginalised, it's become subsequent, subservient to the technology. So I think that we can identify with the people involved in a way that we may not be able to in the same way in modern conflicts. So there's a whole raft of reasons. The other things too, if you consider the characters, the main characters, the main players, Adolf Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, Roosevelt, those are people that are kind of larger than life. I don't care how good an author you'd be, it would be almost impossible to write or to conceive of a character like Adolf Hitler. He does seem to be almost a fictional character, an invention of some deranged imagination, but he wasn't. Similarly, Joseph Stalin, when you read about what sort of person he was, what he did, what he got away with, his crimes, it is almost beyond belief, just what went on and how these appalling events came about. So it's scope and scale, characters, the principal belligerents, the role of the common man, because most of the armies were conscript of one sort or another, the human component versus technology, and just the sheer influence that it's had on the post-war world. It's still something that resonates with us through to this day, and it is interesting to see my stepsons, their generation, is just as interested in it as I was. Video games and things, they're now their mode of entertainment, which we didn't have. A great many of them oriented towards events that happened during 1939 to 45. So I was explaining that to him. He asked the same question that everybody asks when they come into this room, is why have you got swastikas and SS memorabilia around? And I'm getting accustomed to answering that question. The simple fact of the matter is, if you're dealing with World War II, you have to deal with the Nazis. You can't eliminate them. It's an important part of the historic record to have their flags, their banners, their weapons, the propaganda material. If you try and excise that, then you lose a big chunk of truth, a big chunk of the narrative. And I'm at pains to try and explain to people that it's not endorsement of National Socialism, not a Nazi, they're simply war trophies. If you're going to hang out at the zoo, don't be surprised if you see a bit of monkey shit. If you're going to come into a collection involving weapons and memorabilia from World War II, you are going to see some things that might upset you. So get used to it. And the other thing is, I've got them up on the walls, etc., because this is not accessible to the public. This is a private collection. It's not something I would hang off the balcony. It's not something I would put in the shop window. But in the privacy of my own home and context of the collection overall, I don't think it's a big deal. The other thing too, with why I collect infantry small arms, I joined the army at 18. The army was kind of like a surrogate father to me, and I was in the infantry. Weapons, small arms, were our stock and trade. They were just bread and butter, no big deal. So that's why I have a particular penchant for the army orientation and also infantry small arms. The other reason being that I'm not wealthy enough, like Jacques Littlefield, to be able to collect tanks. If I could, I would. If I could collect aircraft carriers, I would. If I had the resource, I'd have a huge football field full of all sorts of bits and pieces, equipment, aircraft, everything from the Second World War. But my means are somewhat more modest. So I've just limited myself to the things that interest me, which is generally infantry small arms. And there is no substitute, whether you're looking at movies or reading books or watching DVDs, for actually picking up the artefacts themselves, either the weapons or the uniform items, and being able to manipulate them, gauge their weight, make assessments of how useful or difficult or useless they may have been. It just gives you a sense of connection with the items. And one of the great pleasures that I've had is I've had a handful of World War II veterans come into this man cave and the old man cave, and it was just fascinating to see them looking around the room and going and grabbing one or two different types of firearms and listening to their stories. So it was a real sense of being connected with the events of the day. You've got to remember also that the veterans, although they're dying at a rapidly accelerating rate, sadly, they're still going to be with us for quite some time, and it is quite sobering experience to have somebody in the room grabbing a German firearm and talking about how he experienced using that firearm in a battle like Monte Cassino in 1944, one of the big battles in New Zealand's military history. So that's been very, very rewarding, and I hope various friends who have relatives that fought in the war, I hope that at some point they'll come in and sit down, have a beer, and just relive the moments of history. So that's what I do, and that's what we're going to be doing from now on in. I've got hopefully a trip to the US. We're going over in December to the gun show. I'll be buying a few bits and pieces over there. The business deal I talked about previously is ongoing. It should be concluded, God, I hope freaking concluded by the end of the month, which is going to give me a bit more resource to be able to go and throw it at some more firearms. There's a Japanese Type 99 light machine gun which I'm negotiating on at the moment, and I've got Bill Shea in the USA has kindly agreed to reserve quite a number of Nazi daggers. These are fairly expensive, reasonably significant to add to the dagger collection. So that's where we're going with this thing. And next year I'm making plans to try and get into Norwich University in the US as a distance student to do a Master of Arts in military history. So that's where we're at the moment. Over the course of summer's on its way. At the moment it's spring and the weather's all crappy, but we are going to be doing quite a bit of shooting over summer, both long range and also taking some of the old World War II infantry rifles and self-loaders out, which we're allowed to shoot. We're not allowed, unfortunately, to shoot fully automatic weapons. You're allowed to have them in this country if you've got a C ticket, a collector's ticket, but they're not allowed to be fired. So we will be doing some long-range shooting to see the performance of things like the Mosin Nagant, the SVT-40, the Garand, the G41, G43, K98s, the Japanese rifles, the Italian rifles. We'll be taking them out as part of our long-range shooting training and just having a yippee and just shooting at 600 to 800 metres onto steel, just to see whether or not these rifles are capable of shooting at that distance. And shooting them side by side too gives you a great deal of really good feedback about the merits of each individual weapon. So that's the plan. Other than that, there's not a hell of a lot happening. When there is, I'll put a video up. Hopefully we'll have a good summer, and I'll see quite a few of you in the US in December. Talk to you soon.